Hi and welcome to this mini lecture on organising. So where are we up to in the course so far? In the first couple of weeks we spoke about introducing management. So we spoke about the contemporary workplace and what we expect of organisations today, and then we worked back to the history and worked out how we got to where we are today. In our last session we focused on planning as a function of management, and in this session we start talking about organising. Just a quick refresher, these are the learning outcomes that you'll find throughout all of our mini lectures for you to refer back to. So in today's mini lecture, what I want you to get out of it is I want you to be able to define organising. What do we mean by organising and how is it a function of management? And I want you also to be able to define what an organisational structure is. And there are two different types of structures which we'll learn about. We'll learn about formal structures and informal structures. So by understanding the differences, then you've got what I want you to get out of this session. So let's start by defining organisation or organising and organisational structure. What is organising? Well, organising, simply put, is the process of assigning tasks, allocating resources and arranging activities to implement plans. It allows us to clarify who does what, who's in charge, with whom do I work with, how are people within the organisations related to each other, and where are the power structures that actually are in place formally. An organisational structure starts to unpack this in a pictorial format. So it allows us to say, okay, these are the tasks that people are working on. These are the relationships that people have formally. And this is how something gets done. So this is the workflow in which we're actually working through in order to get our outcome. We're also able to start unpacking the communication links and reporting relationships, and that's really important if we want our message to get through the organisation. So when we start to unpack what an organisational structure is, and in a lot of cases when we're restructuring an organisation, we change what is fundamentally the structure. As complicated as that sounds, basically organisations engage in organisational consultants and organisational members engage in what we call organisational design. Now last week we spoke about planning and how we put in place actions to get to where we want to be, right? This week, when we're starting to unpack organising, this actually starts to analyse how it is that what we want to do is going to be operationalised in the organisation. So who's going to actually do the job? Where is it located? At what level do we pay people at? How many people do we have at the top? How many layers do we have? Who reports to who? And that's called an organisational structure. The process is called organisational design. So organising as a management function, the whole point is to divide up the work, arrange resources and coordinate activities in order to get our planning done. So planning sets the direction, organising starts to unpack in an organisation how this plan is going to work. So I mentioned before there are two types of structures. There's a formal structure and there's an informal structure. A formal structure is the organisational chart. It's the picture that organisations present to you and say, this is who is in my organisation, this is how they all connect, these are the reporting relationships and the formal arrangements of work positions within an organisation. So you as an applicant coming into an organisation with the intent of being an employee will know exactly how many levels there are between yourself and the top senior management. You'll know exactly who you report to and who they report to, and you'll know the communication channels and the different departments that exist. The idea is that an organisational chart is the formal picture that identifies various positions and job titles. It also identifies the vacancies for the HR professionals in the workplace. And it allows us to start understanding what are the lines of authority and how do they communicate. And let's be able to communicate if that's not happening at an organisational level. So the idea is a formal structure is the official state. Okay, so this is the way in which the organisation intended to function. The reason why there is an informal structure is because the intent doesn't always happen. So from a definitive and from a pay scale and operational view, this is where I sit in the organization. There are these many people above me. I report to these people, and, you know, arguably I have no reporting relationships to another department, and yet I may interact with them informally all the time. And if that's the case, then we're starting to talk about our informal relationships that exist within an organization, and that's called an informal structure. So within a formal structure, we'll get to the informal structure in a sec, but in a formal structure, we can learn things such as division of work, supervisory relationships, so who reports to whom, the communication channels, so where does formal communication flow within the organization, if there's any major subunits, so if there's a common manager that everyone actually reports to, it'll be able to show that, and it'll be, as I said before, the levels of management. So the vertical layers of management are actually depicted in this picture. As I mentioned, there is always a formal and there is always an informal. So the informal structure is known as the shadow. Okay, so it's the unofficial but often critical working relationships between organizational members. This is where you walk into an organization and the most powerful person in that organization, as soon as you step foot, is the receptionist. Because the receptionist is the key to the shadow in a lot of cases. Not all the cases, but a lot of the cases. Because what they end up doing is they are able to navigate you to the right people, or talk to the people that may not be the person that you came to talk to, but they'll know who you should talk to. The idea is that in an organization, there are a multitude of working relationships, and there are lots of other relationships that develop informally. And by developing informal relationships, you actually end up being more efficient sometimes than actually going through the formal channels. So an informal structure tends to exist and is created naturally in order to actually communicate and work productively in that organization. Informal learning is also recognized as an important resource, and what we tend to do is that an informal structure will be able to make those links to get you to know more about the organization than you would normally not know about. So, in a nutshell, organising is defined as the arranging and structuring of work to accomplish the organisation's goal. There are formal and informal relationships within an organisation, and it's really important that you actually understand both, because while one is communicated directly through a picture and is the formal reporting relationships, most often the case, a lot of the activity that actually goes on happens in the informal networks. So understanding both within an organisation is certainly key to being successful in management. I look forward to seeing